Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. Today, I want to talk a little bit about inefficiency. Inefficiency sounds like a weird starter here. Not usually something we cover at the No Days Off podcast, but inefficiency is actually really beneficial when it's used strategically. See, being efficient, efficiency in general is pretty great. Until, of course, it costs you some things like trust or creativity or depth. I want to dive into this a little bit more. I want to share how an experience that I have with a business partner and his inefficiency has actually become, or it's been leveraged, I should say, as one of his greatest strengths. And I want to talk how you can maybe harness some of this purposeful slowness to win in both business and life. So I want to set the stage. I think we live in a world that's obsessed with efficiency. More productivity, fewer steps, tighter systems, everything optimized. Look, I love systems. I love systems just as much as the next guy, if not more. I love moving fast. I run businesses. I run races. I'm kind of wired to maximize output. But I've learned something as I progressed throughout my career. I learned something that's kind of challenged the way I think. And that is that sometimes inefficiency is not a weakness, it's a superpower. So, as I mentioned at the start, I have a business partner that I would describe as from time to time, every once in a while, time to time, he's rather inefficient. He almost has this external metric that is known as inefficient. He's not super quick to respond. He doesn't rush decisions. He's not going to be the first one to speak up a lot of times. Sometimes he lets things sit longer than I'm probably comfortable with. And to be honest, it still drives me nuts, but especially early on, it would drive me crazy because I'd push for action and he'd kind of stiff arm me and want more space. I'd say, let's go. And he either wouldn't respond or he'd say, no, let's wait. Over time, though, I started to see something that I couldn't ignore. And that is that the things he tends to wait on, I mean, a lot of times they were playing out better than they would have. It pains me to admit it, but a lot of times it would play out better than I originally thought it would. I think there's two faces to inefficiency. I think there's a difference between, laziness as maybe some would perceive it and being deliberate. I think for many, what might look like inefficiency is actually patience. And I think in my partner's case, maybe that showed up a little bit. I think sometimes it was letting the dust settle before we made a call. Or I thought sometimes it was letting someone show their character instead of reacting immediately. And yeah, sometimes it was just straight up can kicking. But here's the twist. Even the can kicking sometimes can create more space for clarity. What felt like delay to me oftentimes ended up being really good timing. So inefficiency can win. If we zoom out, right? I think there's a handful of places where inefficiency isn't just acceptable. I think it's actually super valuable. Here's 5 areas where I think inefficiency is important and valuable. Number 1, hands down, in trust building. Relationships do not run on time blocks, right? They run on connection. So when you slow down to listen, when you're taking the long way through a conversation as opposed to trying to just get it to the end, when you're letting that silence do its work, I think that's how you start to build trust. See, efficiency would say, what's the fastest way through this? But leadership actually says, what's the deepest way through this? And that there's a big difference there. So number 1, I think trust building. The second place where I think inefficiency is valuable is in creativity and strategy. In other words, you can't just brute force brilliance. Some of the best ideas you will ever have will come from long walks. They'll come from scribbles in your notebook. They come from the middle of the night mind dumps. They don't usually come from these time boxed brainstorming sessions. Your brain actually needs space. And that's somewhat inefficient, but it's also essential. Number three, the third place where inefficiency might pay off is in hiring the right people. Hiring fast feels efficient, but hiring wrong, as you probably know, maybe you have experienced, hiring wrong is the costliest mistake that you can probably make. So taking that extra week, that extra interview, that time spent really listening, well, that inefficiency in the long run might save you months and months of chaos. Number four, the fourth place where inefficiency might show up and be super valuable is in conflict resolution. You ever fire off like a super fast reply to an email or a text, and you ended up just making things worse? Have you ever handled something like I handled it too quickly, and then you regret how you handled it? Sometimes I think sitting with the tension is better than rushing into some sort of resolution. In other words, what I've had to learn over the years is not everything needs to be solved today. Some things need to settle before they can be solved. So conflict resolution is a great spot to create some inefficiency. And then number five, this is certainly one you probably all know, but big decisions. Big decisions, when making big decisions, inefficiency is super valuable. Here's the weird paradox. The bigger the decision, the more we feel pressure to decide fast. But the bigger the stakes, the more value there is in this slow, deliberate, clear thinking. So there's a difference between momentum and I think this urgency addiction, and it tends to show up here. So inefficiency in making big decisions is incredibly valuable when you use it strategically. Now, there is a point where it goes too far, right? Like I did say, my partner that I was describing, he wins oftentimes with this inefficiency. But inefficiency can be a liability from time to time when it becomes avoidance or when it becomes indecision or excuse making or it's fear that's just masked as I'm still thinking about it. That ends up being stagnation, right? So there is times you can push it too far. But when the inefficiency is intentional, I think that's when it's really, really powerful. So how to use this in your life? I want you to ask yourself a few questions, okay? Number one, I want you to ask yourself, where am I confusing speed with success? Where am I confusing speed with success? Number two, where am I rushing something that actually deserves some more space? And then number three, I want you to ask, is this a moment to act or a moment to absorb? Is this a moment to act or a moment to absorb? If you have partners in your world like mine, someone who has a tendency to slow the game down, don't get mad, don't get frustrated, certainly don't write them off. Take a step back and watch how it plays out. And you might find that their so-called inefficiency could fill in your blind spots and really support your partnership. It allows for maybe to compensate for what your speed may miss. At least that's been my experience. That's all I have for you today, the No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.